Today we have an exciting program, and I appreciate everybody coming. We have, I think, close to 100 people watching online right now, and then all of you here. So the program is up in the front and also on the sideboard. And so at 10:30, the bottom of the hour here, Lisa's going to do her presentation. Lisa wasn't able to be here in person, so we have her hook up here, and she's going to talk about, where the research initially started and where it's been going. And we've got Dr. Bailey here in the background who does research with Lisa. He's a professor at Northwestern and has done incredible papers with her, and he's going to talk too about where they have been. We're going to start a little bit early, Lisa. We're just make sure we've got...
Hey, thanks for coming. Please excuse any technical difficulties. We're, multimodal here. So I'm assuming that if you've signed up for ROGD Awareness Day, that you're well acquainted with the concept and the controversy around the phenomenon. I first published in 2018 a paper exploring a phenomenon of late-onset gender dysphoria in young adults. And since then, there have been several follow-up studies, and as well as a few studies that claim to refute the concept of ROGD. So today, I'm going to talk about where we are now and what the state of evidence for ROGD is. So the take-home message, jumping to the punchline, so you can tune out for the next couple of slides if you choose to. But the evidence to support ROGD is early, but growing in strength. So in studying this new population, everybody is aware that over the past 15 years, there's been a tremendous change in the demographics of people presenting with gender dysphoria, with a new presentation, with a substantial increase in teenagers, a switch of the sex ratio, the emergence of and growth of the number of young people who did not have a prior history of gender dysphoria, as well as this new population has multiple psychosocial issues. And so to study these events, I focus on late-onset gender dysphoria that begins during or after puberty in adolescents and young adults. And with reports of a clustering pattern of cases and the social media content, and the fact that these changes are driven by adolescents, it felt responsible to explore the potential role of social influences. And because of these psychiatric difficulties, psychological and social factors are part of what I was studying. So I wanted to start off with an official definition that the term rapid onset gender dysphoria is a term that I created to describe a phenomenon where teens and young adults who did not have observable signs of gender dysphoria during their childhood became gender dysphoric or trans-identified during or after puberty. The ROGD hypotheses are that psychosocial factors such as social influence, mental health conditions, trauma, maladaptive coping mechanisms, internalized homophobia can cause or contribute to the development of gender dysphoria in some individuals. So this is not currently a formal diagnosis, and it is proposed as an explanation for some, not all, cases of gender dysphoria. So I have the puzzle pieces there to illustrate some, not all, because in the research or editorials that attempt to refute the hypothesis, there's a confusion in that presenting a counterexample might invalidate the whole thing. Now, had I said this explains all cases of gender dysphoria, then a case that is not meeting this, these criteria would have disproven it, but this is some, not all. So in the same way, if individuals with diabetes, some may have type 2 diabetes, the existence of people with type 1 diabetes does not invalidate the existence of people with type 2 diabetes. So there are different pathways, there are different outcomes, people can have different experiences. So the first study was in 2018, and this was a parent report study, which is a very common way to study young people. And parents reported on their adolescents and young adults with late-onset gender dysphoria. There were 256 parents, and the average current age of the youth described were 16. And I'm going to describe first the parent report studies and then the self-report studies together, even though it's not chronological. The next study I will touch on, Diaz and Bailey, was published in 2023, and this was a report of 1,655 parents reporting on their adolescent and young adult children. The third study was a study of detransitioners describing their own experiences. There were 100 detransitioners, and the ages of that group ranged from age 18 to more than 60 years of age. And the fourth study is a study of desisters and detransitioners. So that was both individuals who had transitioned and then reversed and are now identifying with their biological sex, as well as people who did not transition, but who did identify as trans and then return to identifying with their biological sex. And there were 78 of those participants. The ages were 18 to 33. So the specific components I'm going to talk about, which is what I would call the components of ROGD, are the late onset gender dysphoria, beginning during or after puberty, social influences, and psychological and social factors. And when I describe each of these studies, I will point out the findings related to late onset, social influences, and psychological and social factors. So first, the study one, and I apologize, this is a busy slide, but I'm just going to talk about the highlights. So the late onset gender dysphoria was that the parents reported that their children's, this was an eligibility criteria, began during or after puberty. But what was really interesting is that most of the parents reported 0 gender dysphoria indicators prior to their child's puberty. And many of these indicators were not subtle. These were things that any parent would recognize, such as who their child's friends are, or whether the child refused to dress in a certain way. Social influences, what came from the study is that these kids belonged to a friend group where one or more friends became trans-identified in a similar time frame. And in more than a third, the majority of the friends in the friend group became trans-identified. And the dynamics were really interesting in that these friend groups mocked people who were not trans. Parents were asked what they thought potential sources of influence were, and they pointed out YouTube transition videos, Tumblr, friends, online communities. And many of these kids had pre-existing mental health conditions and diagnoses. Shortly after this paper was published, several clinicians reported that this was what they were seeing in their own patient population. So it's not just parents who were observing this, clinicians were observing this with their patients. The second study that I'll talk about is also a parent report of 1,600 and more than 1,600 parents, and showed similar findings, that the young people had late onset of their gender dysphoria, that they reported that their child was friends with other youth who came out around the same time as their child, and the vast majority of these kids had mental health issues that predated the gender dysphoria by, on average, 3.8 years. So it's hard to say that this is all minority stress when the mental health issues started first, before the trans identification. Now, individuals who are very opposed to the concept of ROGD would say, oh, but that's just parents. Parents, we can't really trust what parents are saying. So the next two studies are based on individuals reporting their own experiences. And this first one was detransitioners, 100 detransitioners and the language and terminology is evolving. These detransitioners, it was defined in the study as having transitioned with hormones or surgery and then having detransitioned by stopping hormones or having surgery to reverse the changes, regardless of how they identified. So then when we asked detransitioners, they also said that, around half, little less than half, that their gender dysphoria began during or after puberty. They also confirmed that they belonged to friend groups where one or more friends transitioned before they did, that their friend groups mocked people who were not trans-identified. And this I found really, really striking, is that 20% indicated that they felt pressured to transition by a person. And the people listed were clinicians, partners, friends, and online communities. And so, what we can say is that for some people, there is social pressure to transition. So their experiences supported what the parents indicated, what they thought was influential. And the individuals said that there were social sources that encouraged them to believe transition would help them. And they are, as you see here, YouTube transition videos, blogs, Tumblr, etc. Also interesting in terms of psychological and social factors contributing is that 58% expressed that they believe that their gender dysphoria was caused by a mental health condition or trauma. And nearly a quarter expressed that they believe that difficulty accepting themselves as lesbian, gay, or bisexual was the root of their gender dysphoria and their desire to transition. So this is really filling out the story that gender dysphoria and the desire to transition and trans-identification is complicated. It's not just one type of gender dysphoria transition for everybody. This is complex, and there are many different things that might have different treatments. And then moving on to study number 4, this is a study that Dr. Bailey and I worked on together. We also found that participants acknowledged the late onset of their trans-identification or gender dysphoria, that there were similar findings around social influence and psychological and social factors, but we dug a little bit deeper. Instead of just asking, did you experience this? Did you experience that? We asked individuals to rate factors on how important they were in their becoming trans-identified and gender dysphoric. And so I'm going to start with the social factors that are on the slide. And the scale we used to have them rate were between 1 and 5, between not at all important and extremely important. So these social factors that are listed are between moderately important and very important to their becoming trans-identified and gender dysphoric. And they include Tumblr, social influence, a person known in real life, and YouTube transition videos. So what else was important or highly rated in terms of becoming trans-identified and gender dysphoric? So the following psychological and social factors were pretty close to very important. They're between moderately important and very important. And the findings, highly rated, were interpreting the feelings of trauma or a mental health condition as gender dysphoria. So patients can misattribute their experiences and their symptoms. Second, self-hatred and wanting to be a different person, and maladaptive coping mechanisms. And if this is the root of somebody becoming gender dysphoric and trans-identified, it's really hard to believe that a 30-minute assessment would be adequate to determine whether somebody should or should not transition. And then, I'm sure a question that comes up is, what kind of factors are related to individuals, to their cessation of gender dysphoria and relinquishing a trans-identification? And we asked participants about this, and the following items, the most highly rated, which were between very important and extremely important, were the participants' own thought processes in terms of relinquishing a trans identification, feeling that the causes of gender dysphoria were more complicated than participants previously understood, and that their own personal understanding of female and male changed so that they now felt comfortable identifying as their natal sex. So to summarize, what is the state of evidence about the ROGD hypotheses? Early but increasing in strength. We know that for some individuals with gender dysphoria and trans identification, that they experience late onset gender dysphoria, that social influences were part of their experience of gender dysphoria, as was psychosocial factors. So the stepwise increase are that there are 2 parent report research articles. There are not pictured, the clinicians documenting their own experiences with their patients, a self-report study on detransitioners, a self-report study of desisters and detransitioners, and of course, more research is needed. So thank you. These are the references. And then I will move on to Dr. Bailey's slides.
Thank you, Lisa. Dr. Bailey. Dr. Mike Bailey is a professor at Northwestern, so right down the road from us, doing research with Lisa, so he's going to fill in some additional information.
Thanks. Before I get started, my coach, know a little bit about you, your background. Raise your hand if you know an adolescent who is experiencing gender dysphoria or calling themselves trans. Okay. Raise your hand if you know a girl, somebody born female, who's an adolescent like that. Raise your hand if you know a boy, an adolescent boy like that. Okay, good to know. Okay, so this graph here, this is the clinics, the gender dysphoria that have a stock clinic in the UK. You can't see that here the years, but you can see a remarkable upturn. That is an epidemic. That is not plausibly due to increased tolerance of transgender people. Lisa, could you advance? Yeah. Okay, this arrow here, it's not pointing to anything special on this slide. This is a graph in the UK. That arrow where it's pointing to is where the upturn started in North America. Ken Zucker, a very important scientist in Toronto, first noticed this upturn. And he noticed an upturn in adolescent cases, also in the ratio of female to male cases. That's around 2007. I think it is no accident, even though I don't attribute the entire upturn in North America to this. 2007 is when the internet platform Tumblr started. If you've never heard of Tumblr, Tumblr was a space where not just troubled adolescents, but many of them congregated to discuss about it. So, BT before Tumblr, and AT after Tumblr. Next slide, please. Okay, should we go blog I wrote for Fourth Wave Now? The title is Gender Dysphoria is Not One Thing. That is important for everybody in here to know. Important enough.
You're being asked to use the
Oh, okay. Hello. Okay.
Okay.
That's okay. Important enough. So let's all say it together. 1, 2, 3. Gender dysphoria is not one. Okay. Good. Next slide. There are 3 kinds of gender dysphoria. Next slide, please. They are childhood-onset gender dysphoria, autogynephilic gender dysphoria, and rapid-onset gender dysphoria. Lisa has already provided a terrific introduction to rapid-onset gender dysphoria, and I'm going to contextualize that a little, both historically, I've already started, and clinically. Next slide, please. Okay, the classic kind of gender dysphoria that most people think of when you talk about gender dysphoria is this, childhood-onset gender dysphoria. It occurs in both boys and girls. It starts very early, often before a child can speak much, but certainly well before puberty. There's some pictures there. The one on the left is a little boy wearing a dress. The one on the right, that's a male female, a girl, we used to call them. And they're extremely cross-gendered. And their gender nonconformity, which is their cross-gender behavior, comes out of nowhere. There's not plausibly that they're not learning this from anyone. Their parents are not teaching them this. They don't have peers like this. It emerges, I think, innately. I think it's biological. I'm curious, how many of you personally know any children like this? Okay, few of you do. All right. Now, next slide. This is, anybody know who that is? That's Jazz Jennings. She's kind of a celebrity. She had a reality TV show. And Jazz was born male, very gender nonconforming. Now, what happened to Jazz would have been quite unusual when I started studying this back in the 1990s. Her parents decided to raise her as a girl. They socially transitioned her. That's new. And that is, in some areas, pretty popular to do. I predict that children who are socially transitioned will continue and get medical transition and live as trans women. And I don't predict high rates of regret. I do think that it is likely that they may have led what I would consider better lives had they not transitioned, in which case most natal males like this would grow up to be gay men. See, most natal females who are analogous to this, most actually grow up to be heterosexual women, but, you know, a fair number of them grow up to be lesbian. Okay, next slide. Autogynephilic gender dysphoria. Autogynephilia is a sexuality, and this is its most florid expression, most clinical expression, transvestic fetishism, in which a natal male cross-dresses for sexual purposes. A subset of people with autogynephilia will become trans women. And these are examples. I don't know if any of them would admit to that, but I believe, based on their histories, that they are. These represent a fairly recent development. These are youth who are autogynephilic. They admit it, they recognize it in themselves, and they are transitioning. This is Phil Illey. Some of you may remember the controversy about Phil at GenSpec last year. I want to say that that controversy was troubling to me because I think it suggested some misunderstandings about autogynephilia and a tendency among the gender critical, and I'm certainly an ally of the gender criticals, to demonize autogynephilia, and I think there's no reason for that. Phil Illey is a nice guy. In this picture, he is not sexually aroused. He is not encroaching on female spaces. He's there to try to be helpful. So we can talk more about that later if you want. Next slide, please. So rapid onset gender dysphoria. Again, Lisa already told you what it was, but this shows you some interesting context on the left here. This is the weekly referrals for youth gender dysphoria between 2010 on the left and 2018 on the right. Again, you see that huge rise over here. In the red, that's for girls. On the blue, that's for boys. They're both rising, but girls much more than boys. And there's a sex difference in what we believe is ROGD, favoring girls. What's going on with the boys? Well, maybe there's an analogous ROGD. I didn't say already, but I'll say it now. Many, perhaps most cases of ROGD in boys is caused by autogynephilia. Now, autogynephilia hasn't increased, I don't think. What males do with autogynephilia may be changing because of what they learn from their social environment. Next slide, please. This is Helena Kirshner. Here she is, 2013. That looks pretty female typical, right? Then she got ROGD. 2014, 15, 16, 17. And then she detransitioned. Helena is an admirable person, very smart. She's, I think, studying for her undergraduate degree in England now after dropping out. She was in Chicago. She's doing great. But she was quite troubled in there. She was taking testosterone. But she fully admits being a case of ROGD. Next slide, I'm almost done. So this is from a previous epidemic. These are actually, I guess, two related epidemics. This is some article about the psychiatrist Bennett Braun, who had a clinic in Skokie treating multiple personality disorder. And this is from a legal criminal case where this woman testified against her father in a murder trial on the basis of recovered memories of sexual abuse. MPD, multiple personality disorder, and recovered memories were both epidemics. And they were epidemics of socially contagious phenomena that were quite destructive. Next slide, please. This is the number of cases who contacted the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, started by parents accused of horrible sexual crimes against their daughter. Couldn't possibly have happened. You can see sharp increase
and then sharp decrease. That's what we're hoping for with ROGD. What made it happen? Well, part of it was legal cases. People started getting sued. Then societies stopped allowing this among their members. It came down. Now, these are a fraction of what was really going on. A scholar recently estimated that at the peak times in the late 90s, there were 1 million cases per year of accusations based on recovered memories. These are fathers, these are typically a young adult woman who in therapy came to believe that her father molested her terribly over years, broke off contact with the family. Which is worse, that or having your daughter say she wants testosterone because she's trans? We shouldn't have to choose. Both this epidemic and the ROG epidemic represents the worst, most irresponsible, unforgivably irresponsible conduct of the mental health profession. If we have therapists in here, you're not part of the problem. Thank you for being here. Okay. Oh, one more. Advance, Lisa. We might be there with the CAS report. I'm hoping we are. I'm hoping we're about to come down. Okay, I'm done.
Look at the eye. We're going to do some audience questions. I think you made some people angry.
Okay.
Yeah. Why don't you and I'll grab. Yeah, for Lisa and Dr. Balin.
I'm not sure where to start with you, but I'm going to start with the last slide. We have schools pushing this, and we'll talk about that a little bit later today, sir. But when you say this is where you're hoping we are, as far as the uptick and then the downtrend, well, what are you using to inform that idea? How do you know that, where we are in the scope?
I don't know that. I'm hoping. So what's the reason for hope? You know, the CAS review, the final report just came out. And Europe has already gone way beyond us, and they've started to ban certain practices for certain age groups and so on. And WPATH has recently lost a tremendous amount of prestige based on revelations. You see the New York Times occasionally runs sensible articles, and just I kind of smell it in the air. But Lisa, you want to say something?
She's getting a text of her asking her to comment on.
My question is a follow-up to that. Shall I go ahead while we're getting?
Yeah. And now, I think Tiffany, did you want to say something else? Yeah.
When Elena pharmaceutical,
Yes.
and like you had some yeah. So my question is, I don't know that it's more comparable in the machine that's pushing this, and so that's why I want to try to understand where we were.
I do not believe that the pharmaceutical companies are pushing this. I believe that they're not unhappy. The amount of money that they make on this from, say, Littman versus what they make from treatment of prostate cancer is very small. And it's not great publicity for them. So I think this idea that this is at all pushed by the pharmaceutical companies, I think it's incorrect, although, I don't know.
Well, I'm kind of following on that as a similar question. In those other cases, was there kind of an underlying incentive or benefit from hospitals and pharmaceutical companies with the other past epidemics? And do you think that would make this maybe a slower curve in terms of on declining?
Okay, so I want to start. I think that we should at least give the what do they call people who are in favor of transition, like gender affirming care people, and the recovered memories people. We should at least grant them that they believed in what they were doing. And I think that was a big part of it. They think they're doing God's work, or except yet. Of course, everybody wants to make money. They were happy to make money, but they believed in what they were doing. And also back in the 90s, they believed that they were, fighting against evil. And they also today think they're fighting against the intolerant, evil.
I'll just jump in. I practice emergency medicine. So my experience, with the opioid crisis, I see a lot of similarities. And I do think it's more complicated in part because of the way hospital systems have evolved into sort of, consumer entities that want to be liked. And I also think the recent changes in civil rights laws with Obamacare, they wrote in a lot of civil rights laws that have been challenged, but basically now, just recently in April or May, they finalized a Rule 1557, which makes it discrimination to really not give the euphemism gender-affirming care. So I think those complications are different, which is going to make, I think, the slope down a little more challenging, in my opinion, just from practicing. But I know we have a bunch of questions from my lovely ladies over there. Oh, Alvin, sorry.
Hello. Doctor.
Yeah.
Doctor, thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's excellent. I had a question and I had time. So the question is, was really fascinating about the recovered memory phenomenon. Do you remember or do you know how that was delivered, that social contagion, to women? Was it young women, older women? Was it through, obviously social media wasn't what it was when it existed in the 90s. So how did that social contagion get passed? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's different than now. That was largely from therapist to patient. No, there was a lot of talk among potential patients. By the way, those were those were largely radical feminists who believed that there was huge instance of father-daughter incest. It happened, not at all huge, and so on. By the way, don't call me Dr. Bailey unless you will let me take out your appendix. I'm a PhD, and call me Mike. It's fine. Okay.
All right, Mike. I don't think I'm going to have it taken out today, so I'm good. Okay. I just have one comment about the pharmaceuticals. Certainly, there are other drugs that are a lot more lucrative and financially lucrative. But I will say that in a lot of states, and for sure in Indiana, but this is the patterns are the same. Eli Lilly is one of the biggest drug manufacturers in the world, right, in the country. And they pump a ton of money into mental health initiatives in schools, and those school counselors are the ones that are the biggest purveyors of the transgender calls. So while they may not be pushing it overtly, like you said, it's not a very popular thing, they certainly are seeding their future customers. And so that's where the pharmaceutical is really coming in. But
you know what? I think it would be a great strategy to get outraged at Eli Lilly, and they will back off quick.
Yeah, and as Tiffany was saying, there's only 2 countries in the world that allow advertising of pharmaceuticals on TV and social media, which is the United States and New Zealand. So it's a complex issue. I've got our great ladies over there, Bernadette and Royals. You want to go ahead with your question.
To represent. All right, so good morning, Dr. Bailey. I'm Bernadette Royals. I'm an attorney. I'm president of the Childhood Rights Campaign. I have the privilege of representing Jamie Reed. Have you heard of her? Okay. So she was just an incredible whistleblower, radical left, tattoo covering lefty who believed. And after watching the number of kids that she was they were harming, she had to break it. Okay, so here's what she wanted. She whistleblew and uncovered two important things relevant to her. One was that the doctors she was working with were refusing to believe the harm that they were causing right in front of their eyes. She continually put before them the cases in which they were harming, and they willfully suppressed the data. They refused to allow her to collect data, and they refused to even acknowledge that this was happening and they were causing it. So, and I think we have every reason to believe that that's endemic, that they're representative. Okay, so I want to give the truth for thought into thinking that these practitioners believe that they are doing good. If they believe that, it is a false religion. Secondly, she also exposed one last thing, that the pharmaceutical reps were showing up and they knew exactly how their drugs were being used. And they were complicit in making sure that the doctors had free access to be able to provide these off-label prescriptions. So I do proffer that this is a representative snapshot at an academic institution, Washington University, not some, alley clinic, that I think may help broaden our understanding of truly how innocent the pharmaceutical companies are when they have these lifelong patients, and that these practitioners are genuinely believing they're doing only good, and they refuse to appreciate the harm.
I think that intentional deception seems to be compatible these days with believing that you're on the right side. Just look at mainstream media and politics and everything else. So, but anyway, thank you for the work you're doing. And
my question actually is, I'm sorry, I didn't ask my question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that is, it is clear that it's going to require the alphabet medical associations to disown the false credibility of these treatments. And so my question to you as a practitioner, a leading voice, is what do you think it's going to take for the APA, etc., to finally acknowledge that this is an error and it is harmful?
You're one of the vectors by which that will happen. The legal cases are going to be big in the United States because we don't have these national healthcare organizations who are going to do some kind of systematic review. So yeah, do that. Count on scientists to give good scientific testimony if you need us.
That's great.
Mike, quick question. I'm a mom here in Illinois, founder of Awake Illinois, and also a chapter chair of Moms for Liberty. So we are working very hard to empower peers to know what is happening with this agenda, right? And here in Illinois, comprehensive sexual education funnels a lot of this agenda via curricula, materials to teachers, school counselors, etc. So it could start much younger than people realize. And my question to you as an academic PhD at Northwestern University is, what are you seeing there? Because when we look at, for example, Lurie Children's Hospital, they have a gender clinic. We know that they are pushing this with children, with families. And a lot of these doctors come from Northwestern University Medical School. So what are you seeing at your university? Are you seeing a pendulum shift? Are you seeing a pivot? Or are you still seeing doctors come out of your university who are indoctrinated and still intentional on practicing this medicine and pushing this agenda?
I probably am not the best person to answer your question. I'm a faculty in a psychology department. I do basic psych on this and sexual orientation and so on. I teach statistics. I mean, I do see discussion of issues like this, I guess, especially among our graduate students who are pretty woke. And, I've had some pushback about these ideas. So, yeah, I don't know what it's like at Northwestern University, really.
Yeah. So I can briefly add, because, I practice medicine. I don't take appendixes out, but, what I will say, Shane, I could if I was forced to, but, there have been developed through basically Health and Human Services and funding that goes to medical education. There are fellowships now, in trans health as well as, in gynecology. This is, an accepted, entity. I've listened to, CME programs and grand rounds at major hospitals and even community hospitals where, they have presentations from the trans community talking about everything that, this is the accepted kind thing to do. So again, I think back to that curve, it's hard. There is a pipeline of physicians being trained that, this is a new clinical entity and area of study. But it is, kind of niche in that way. And I will say that there's been big changes in the electronic health record where they've changed fields and erased biologic sex. So there are, some, really serious things that have happened, and that affects data collection, but it also affects, safety events happening. So I don't see a lot in emergency medicine. That area, people are very still rooted in reality, but it is a big area now of training. So, yes, others, Nancy, there. Sorry, Erin, you want to go next? Yeah.
Well, I'll give you time to give her the microphone.
Yeah, you go ahead, Erin. Yep.
No. Okay, sorry. So my name's Erin Friday. I am a co-lead of Our Duty. We're a parent advocacy group. And so I work with thousands of parents across the nation. And I caution the simplicity of the ROGD boys are AGPs, because that's not what we see with our parent groups. We see young boys who get caught in the gender vortex because they are Asperger or they have autism. These kids are off the boys. I mean, somebody could call me, they can name their sex of their child, and I can tell you every attribute about that child who gets caught in this. And for the boys, their IQs are off the roof. They're just sky high. They're awkward. They're into computers. They're into video games. They are not going into their mother's drawer and putting on their mother's underwear or bras or getting sexual gratification. There are some, no doubt. But this is not an AGP. And so for those parents of boys, I know they find that really difficult when that is thrown out, because that's not necessarily what their boys. They're getting caught the same way the girls are getting caught. And yes, there are AGPs up and coming, but it's not the vast majority. And so I invite you to maybe, sit down or go on a Zoom with the ROGD boys and listen to what those parents' stories have to say, because they're real. So thank you.
So I do want to say a couple of things about that. First, I didn't say that I know that all of them are autogynephilic. I don't. But some, too many of them, for sure. And one of the studies that Lisa reviewed on detransitioners, we had 7 natal males. 6 of them said that they experienced sexual arousal to cross-dressing, which is the hallmark of autogynephilia, 6 out of 7, and the detransitioners. So, also, I don't think, so with respect to parental knowledge about autogynephilia, if parents catch their son taking panties and masturbating, as sometimes happens, then they know. If they don't catch him, I don't think and a son doesn't say, hey, I have this sexual thing to their mom. That doesn't mean that they don't have that sexual thing. I can tell you, and I'm just, believe it or not, I'm just a typical straight guy. I never once told my mother about any of my sexual fantasies or behaviors. So the final thing I'll say is, I think parents are too reactive against the possibility that their son is autogynephilic. Look, we would all prefer our children to be typical. Girls with ROGD, they're not autogynephilic, not typical either. Even without ROGD, these are not typical girls. Boys with ROGD, whatever that is, including autogynephilia, which, one more thing, it is a typical observation among people who admit ROGD that this group is pretty weird in terms of autism-like symptoms. They also tend to have some pretty smart people in them. So nothing that you said makes me think that very few of them are autogynephilic. I don't know that they all are. I don't know even that most are. But if I had to hypothesize, I would hypothesize that many of them are. But I don't think parents should panic one way or the other. What parents should be opposed to is not that their sons might be autogynephilic, but that their sons are going to transition when they're 16 years old. That seems to be unwise regardless.
Derek Coletta, just the dad from Winnetka. I just wanted to touch on drugs in terms of that aspect of pharmaceutical, all the depression. I mean, I'm not in that area or whatever, but it just seems to me like, the Tumblr thing was very stunning. What I'd want to know or would be interested in seeing is like, when was the uptick in pushing all this medication on young kids for various things? Because every kid, every boy has, some sort of, issue now of being too male or whatever, so it's like you got to give them the drugs. Or has any of that and the depression, and antidepressant drugs, is there anything there that is, cause that uptick? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is, my wheelhouse, just at what I see in practice, and I kind of call it Generation P for Generation Pharma. I mean, I really saw, like the 90s, early 2000s. I mean, every emotion, there's a prescription attached to it. And I do think this generation is used to, and the parents are used to, going to the doctor if there's an issue. It gets attached to a diagnosis and then a pill. And I'm not saying that there aren't times that that's appropriate, but it's definitely the default. And some of the detransitioners that, I've worked with and done events with have told me that, when they started with their gender dysphoria, went to the doctor, it's just like automatic, like, oh, okay, here's a diagnosis and like a medicine. It's just sort of the default. And as we talked about also before, it's very hard to be that clinician who's like, well, hey, let's just kind of wait and see here, or you actually don't need that, because that's, not the popular, attitude. So I do think that it's a big, big issue. It's very thorny to try and disentangle it, but there's definitely a default in that way. And I think that's part of the perfect storm that has happened. So yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think so. A couple more questions, then we'll have a break before James Lindsay speak. So, Nat.
Hi, I'm Nancy from GenSpect. I had just a quick comment to make. It's funny you mentioned perfect storm because I know it's tempting to want to look at the pharmaceutical companies and say, well, that's where it is, to look at the schools and say that's where it is. But I think we need to realize that we are caught up in a perfect storm and we shouldn't underestimate the influence of DEI. So, for example, you'll have pharmaceutical companies that are sponsoring trans-friendly websites and other resources because it's part of their DEI effort. And so I think that, realistically, we need to have a kind of a multi-perspective approach on dealing with this.
I think there's one here, a couple more over here. Yeah.
Hi. Have a question about autogynephilia and all of the sexual identities as being linked to trauma, early trauma, sexual trauma, because I feel like the ideology often likes to separate the idea that this comes from some dysfunction in someone's past, but it's just a natural, organic identity. But of course, I'm a psychologist, and that's not what I see over and over and over again. So is there more movement to linking people who are identifying with certain proclivities to trauma?
Okay. I have been interested in trauma for about as long as I've been an academic. And I'm going to say something that you may find controversial, but this is my studied response. That mental health professionals vastly overestimate the influence of trauma on later outcomes. Jeff, look, we all probably had some trauma. We don't like it. It's terrible. But it doesn't have as much effect on people long term as you might think. And there's certainly no reason to think that it has any effect on male sexuality. The development of autogynephilia aligns with the development of other male sexual interests, such as typical heterosexuality, typical homosexuality, and some other more atypical sexualities. They're the first manifestations that are associated with strong sexual arousal or early to mid-puberty when testosterone kicks in. And there is no common early experience among males who are autogynephilic. And many of them have early kind of autogynephilic-like fantasies or ideas even before they are into puberty, just as many heterosexual males have crushes on girls when they're 8 years old. So I believe that autogynephilia but cannot prove that autogynephilia is innate. I do study sexual orientation. That's been my main area, and will be happy to tell you why I think that in men, but not necessarily for women, it's entirely innate.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm Clinton Fairbanks. I am a father of 2 young children. They're all prepubescents right now, so I'm a little bit worried about what's going to start happening to them. Already, my daughter has gone into we were at a hot springs out in Montana, and a guy who was purely male, you could everything about him, and he went into the women's bathroom, and I had no recourse on helping to protect my daughter. So this is one of those is a concerning comment. One of the things, and that's why I've started getting involved in what I'm doing here. What I do for a career is I help restructure companies, so I also go in and do a lot of data analytics. And one of the things I noticed just recently is there's some amazing graphs. You know how you show the graph where around 2007, all of a sudden it starts spiking up? Well, we also have very similar graphs that you'll see with like the reporting of the mainstream media. The words racism, the words transgender, the words, all of these tough subjects to talk about. Around 2012, all of a sudden you see a massive spike up as well. So my comment there is it would be cool to see, like, you have a graph that can also show like what other influences make, the mainstream media reporting and stuff. But the question really comes down to it is, with the mainstream media being such a powerful force about this, what is the recourse for us as well? Because I'll be very honest, as a parent here, I don't want to talk to neighbors of mine for fear that people are going to call me transphobic, and all of a sudden, now that I'm now I'm going to be called racist and everything else and all the words under that. What recourse do we have when it comes down to the media also pushing this agenda?
There are increasingly other mediums. I recommend the Free Press, associated with, I don't know if it's associated with there, but it seems it's kind of connected. I think that gatherings like this, people in your local community and believe me, there are other people you may not know about who agree with you but are afraid to speak up. Find that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.